Surviving natural disasters, man-made disasters, and the possibility of war. Good evening, I'm Toby, and this is Lapis 210. Tonight we're going to discuss something that's near and dear to our hearts in the news right now. We're going to discuss the possibilities of conflict, of different types of disasters, be they man-made or environmental. And we're going to take a look at something that's I refer to as the Lapis hierarchy of survival. Well, based on the concepts of Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, tonight we're going to discuss what you should look at from the basis to its peak perfection in terms of how you should prioritize, how you prepare for your own survival. The constant threat of war, both domestically and abroad, whether it's in the Middle East or Europe, the rise of China and its eventual failure, or just the eventual collapse of the US dollar based on unchecked immigration and overspending. How do you, as a prepared individual, seek to make the most of your time, your assets, and prepare yourself and your family for the best chance of survival? Maslow discussed a thing called the hierarchy of needs, a theory he came up with based on what the basis of your society needs to survive up to its pinnacle. The basis of all this would be the need for food and water, followed next by shelter and clothing, and it works its way up through relationships, education, religion, ending only when you reach a point of utopian mindset, or if you will, bliss, through enlightenment. Today, we're going to discuss the Lapis hierarchy of survival, based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first thing we have to look at is how we prioritize our time, our money, our training, all the assets that you have at your disposal. The first thing we have to look at then is what are the possibilities that I realistically face? You may say it's zombie apocalypse. Okay, I don't necessarily concur with that, but that could be a metaphor for something else. I think environmental disasters or man-made disasters are a real possibility. I think the eventual collapse of the dollar, or worst case, a societal collapse, and I don't mean necessarily a systemic societal collapse, but in regions. We see this at the border right now in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California. These states, even in Florida, deal with an unfettered and virtually unchecked immigration issue. While we might choose to placate to political divides or use politically correct speech in terms of migration or undocumented migrants, the fact is unchecked illegal alien immigration across the border and the flow of narcotics and weapons coming across the border is a real reality that we have to come to terms with. It's important that we look at these things sincerely and make the best use of our time. So for me, I see that as a primary effect being here in Texas, and in that corridor of illegal immigrations flow through Texas. I see this as a real threat, a real need for me to take the possibility of this seriously. So I spend my time fortifying what I have here on my homestead, making sure I have the right equipment and stuff put away, and making sure I have foodstuffs. Dealing with unchecked weather, depending on how the grid's set up, the more of our dependence on renewables creates more of a dependence on the grid to fail. And this is an unfortunate byproduct of this. But as we mitigate coal and natural gas or even nuclear power, and we put more of a reliance on what they call renewable sources, the grid is more tend to fail. So having my ability to prepare for myself for a bad winter or an overhot or overzealous summer allows me a greater chance of survival. So you as an individual have to look at what you feel or you fear might be the real possibility of a threat. This is a critical portion and basis of all of this. If you are tailoring yourself for an invasion of zombies, all right, that might coincide with real threats that you might face when societal breakdown or a natural man-made disaster. But if your fear is of, I don't know, Rick and Morty letting out some kind of plague on the earth, I don't think that's going to do you much well. So make good use of your resources. Start with a good plan. The plan is everything, right? A proper prior plan prevents piss poor performance. And planning alone is good, but a proper plan is better. So start with the basics. What are the possibilities that you might face in a disaster? All right, in an emergency situation. And these could be small things as well. It could be simply as the grid does go down due to an unforeseen accident in your area. That could be to a transformer or a substation going down, something as severe as what we discussed prior to this. So make good use of your resources, come up with a good plan, predict what you think the future holds within a realistic time frame and within the realities of what we could actually face. Now, as you're moving forward and you've decided what your biggest threats are going to be, the next thing you have to look at is how I make best use of my time and seeking training, okay? So you need to seek information. Once you've decided what the threat is, start to research that threat. Start to research the emergency that you perceive could most directly affect you and your family. Educate yourself on that and look at different aspects. Remain objective. Objectivity is critical, especially today. With the rise of subjectivity, replacing or supplanting objectivity or objective thought, it's a critical part of our existence as human beings to look at things scientifically, or as you will, the scientific method. Be realistic, be objective. Remove yourself from the equation and what you feel it might be, and look at things realistically. I commonly refer people to look at the South African and Venezuelan models. Look at the Ukrainian model. While all three are different, all three have a fundamental basis of a societal collapse. And that happens at different terminologies: war versus civil unrest versus political persecution, right? But they all fall in line together, and you see bits and pieces in all three of those different theaters. Take these threats seriously. Look at what you see a threat as. Do your due diligence, be objective, and research that. That gives you basically an azimuth, a direction to travel when you start allocating what your training should be and what you should also put into resources. Start small, right? Look at your training. Are you able to defend yourself? Okay, good. Are you able to make sure you can purify water? Do you have the basics? And there's a million different channels and a million different videos that can give you good insight into their perspective and what your basics should be. All right, defending yourself is critical. You can have all the resources in the world, but if you don't have the ability to defend those resources, well, then you are basically at the mercy of those around you. And the rise of crime, the rise of theft, and the rise of porch pirates is only going to placate itself deeper into a rise in home invasion. It's inevitable. As these other types of crime become more emboldened and more mainstream, you can foresee this becoming a natural progression that we're going to face. Next, take a look at the next portion of your training. If I have defense down for myself, I have what I've allocated a need for weapons and defensive equipment or personal protective equipment. What do I need to look at next? So as you've decided what the problem is, you've researched the problem, that can help drive your training. Next we look at is the gaining infrastructure and supplies. As you begin to fortify yourself, the idea of just bugging out may not be the best course of action for you. In fact, I would awfully recommend to bug in initially. Even if you're in the apartment complex of suburbia, bugging in gives you opportunity to watch the news, watch other news sources as well, not just the mainstream, but start to objectively quantify what's happening around you. Let the initial pandemonium break out. Let it work its way through for the next 3 to 5 days. Kind of weigh in your environmental situation and look at what's happening around you. You want to establish what we call a homeostasis, right? You want to kind of find your equilibrium with your environment, meaning if crime becomes rampant the first, let's say, 24 to 48 hours, let that play through. Fortify yourself in your location and make sure that by doing that you have the supplies to support you in that location. And maybe you have supplies put elsewhere. Okay, you have to decide for yourself where you would move to, where you'd go to, how you want to play out your egress plan, right? You're bugging out. But the initial idea of just bugging out, that may not be a good fit for you. So again, allocate supplies and your infrastructure and see what works best in a tiered fashion. So I have what I need right now for 24, 48, maybe 7 days out, 1 month out. This way you have a tiered plan based on how bad things might progress. And that can also be based on what you think the threats are going to be for you. If it's environmental and it's a simple storm, well then, your 48-hour supply is probably good for that. You may not have to tap into a 72-hour or a 1-week supply or 1-month supply. You can leave that alone. Again, allocate what you need for your timelines and divvy up your infrastructure and supplies to support that. Next, you want to create allies. Going at it alone, being the one-man island, the one-man army, I don't highly recommend it. If you plan on being nothing but mobile, then maybe the one-man or two-man operation works for you. But in reality, you have to sleep at some point. At reality, you have to put yourself in compromising positions because nature is going to make you do that. Whether it's sleep, whether it's eating and drinking, whether it's relieving yourself, it doesn't matter what that is. At some point, you're going to be in a compromising position. Having a buddy or a group that you can rely on, well, yes, it costs you more resources. It gives you far improved security. Again, there's no free lunch, as I like to say. Well, you give up one thing, but you gain another. By having a good group, and it might be a small group, it might be 3 to 5 people. It might be a large group, 20 to 40 people. Or maybe you're a subgroup of a larger group. That works out well too, but you need to make allies. Having a team is a critical part of survival. Looking back at my time in the military and contracting, having a team that you can rely on is a critical part of our survival. Despite what movies or TV tell you, you don't do well. In fact, you're more likely to face serious bodily harm or injury when you don't have a team versus when you go at it alone. Again, there's no free lunch with this. A larger group's got a larger footprint, make more noise, use more resources, okay? It's gonna be easier to find versus a smaller group. Again, depends on how you allocate those allies and how you tier that system, okay? There's no one size fits all, but I do recommend that you make allies. Even if it's just one other person with you, somebody's got to be awake when the other person's sleeping. Somebody's got to watch your back when you're allocated to do other tasks that nature requires. Okay, I hate this word synergize, but we'll look at it in terms of combining different efforts together. As you build your allies, you can build and pool your resources. You can pool your infrastructure. You can pool your training. Perhaps you divvy up training. One person's focused on small engine repair and electronics. Another person's focused on plumbing. Another person's focused on food collection and water collection. All these things start to add up and create a better harmonic community of survival, meaning not only one person has to know all these different things. As a point of fact, if you or just 2 people try to do this all by yourselves, chances are you're not going to learn enough of everything to be proficient at anything. And you can be completely reliant on pubs without a lot of practical experience. That's why, let's say on a team, we divvy up the jobs in a team to several different people. In fact, we might have a primary and a secondary person. Let's say in an ODA. As a weapons sergeant, there'll be a primary weapons sergeant and a secondary weapons sergeant. Same thing with medical, with communications, with engineering, with intelligence, okay, and leadership. The idea is you can do a split team, right, 6 and 6, or we can combine together. But you break up that knowledge, you break up those skill sets so that you have people who can specialize in those areas and get very good at them. And then you cross-train, all right? If I'm really good at small engine repair, maybe it might be wise for me to talk with someone else about plumbing or electrical. I have a good grasp on this, and I'm good at fixing, small engines like chainsaws, small vehicles or full-size vehicles, generators. All these things are going to be critical to survival because that's power and that's transportation, correct? So is water collection and the ability to gain more water and purify that water and store that water correctly. And while that might seem simpler, but if you start dealing with pumps and the pump houses for that and electrical that goes with these things, well, that's not so simple. That's why those people have careers in that field. But then you can cross-train that, okay? You might have someone who's really good at weapons and tactics, all right? Understanding, fortifications and defense. Well, that also is a full-time job, but they also need to cross-train. They can assist other people with those other areas of specialty. So synergize, okay? Well, I hate that word. I can't think of a better word at the moment that better encapsulates what it means. Synergize, bring those things together, pool your resources, pool your training, all right? Maybe this group can befriend this group. It doesn't mean you have to join each other, but you can be allies. You can look out for one another. And if nothing else, when you train and you're acting as a responsible citizen or a well-regulated militia or a well-regulated group, that means you're well-disciplined, well-trained, and well-supplied. And you can support one another to make sure that both groups are traveling in the same direction, can work harmoniously together, because at some point you may have to. Finally, the end is survive. All this is with the intention of surviving a disaster, surviving an emergency or a traumatic event. These events, while we see them playing out in real time, these are something that you really need to take into consideration. Just what we're facing in the greatest country in our world, America. All right, be what you say from anybody else. America is the greatest place in the world. It is. That's why everybody wants to come to America. But right now, we're having a lot of problems. There's a lot of splitting between the people. There's a lot of diametrically opposed viewpoints and philosophies and feelings are being brought into this. And it's too bad that we don't take the same approach that we used to in terms of leaving politics at the shoreline. But this is where we're at, and these are the realistic events that we're dealing with. Me as a Texan, being in Central Texas, I have to take a hard look at what's happening with the border. The unchecked immigration, the drugs, the violence that's coming across the border, the possibility of diseases, and the overtaxation that has to pay for these things, to pay for the added infrastructure, the power, and diminishing dollar. These are all real problems that we have to take a look at. So I think it's very critical and important that we look at these things so we can survive. So do these things, take these steps, look at all the aspects, look at what you can pool together with other people, look at how you prioritize and survive. Surviving is the ultimate goal of all of this. This isn't for fun, this is for us to survive. Now, if you can have fun while you do this, I think that's the better course to take. Getting the family involved, the children, the wife involved, or if you're the wife, getting the husband involved in this. There can be a lot of fun to be had. There can be a lot of great sport behind a lot of this stuff. A lot of this stuff still derives from camping, from the basics of Boy Scouts and camping and outdoor survival, out to what we see with running guns and shooting competitions, even in the world of gaming and movies and entertainment. Okay, all these things can be brought together as educational points to help you have a better outlook and a better outcome. So the recap. All right, we need to first look at what we think is the reality of what's going to happen. That's step one. That's our basis. Next, we need to gain information and start training to make sure that we can survive that event. Next, the third step is ensuring that you have the right training, the right infrastructure and supplies. Then, after that, you need to make those allies. Then you need to synergize it, and finally, that leads to an increased possibility of survival. So this is the LAPIS hierarchy of survival, based loosely on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think this is a good basis and a good echelon to follow that can give you a perspective direction based on what you think is the threat and what you need to do, and what supplies and training you need to get, what allies you need to get, and how you bring those all together. Because ultimately, we all want to survive. We all want to do well in life. We all would like to see peace, but we should always have a mindset for an emergency. Well, I'm Toby, and this is LAPIS 210. And from the bottom up, taking your environment, and from the top down, make sound decisions. Good evening.